Hello there and welcome to Star Wars Comics in Canon, your guide to the wider Star Wars canon through the comic book lens. And to take you on this journey, I'm your host, Mike Burton. And so brings episode 37. And in this one, I am tackling the Lando comic called Lando Double or Nothing. It is set just before the events of Solo: A Star Wars Story, focusing on Lando Calrissian, but the Donald Glover iteration of it, and L3-37, as well as a few other bits and pieces. So some information about the involved characters and whatnot, and general timelines and things. So this takes place around 10 BBY, so about 10 years before the Battle of Yavin, which is when Han and Lando meet each other in Solo. So it is only like a few weeks before that, if that. So he is around 33 years old in the Solo film and this comic, and because he was born in 43 BBY, which means in Rise of Skywalker he was actually 78 years old. Lando's full name is Landonis Balthazar Calrissian, which I did mention before in episode 18 of Star Wars Comics in Canon. So I recommend people go back and check out episode 18. Maybe actually you could check out episode 18 after this, because the only other Lando comic miniseries it's called Lando. It's written by Charles Soule and is actually set around the time of A New Hope. So you can listen to this one, then go back and listen to episode 18 and get even more information about Lando and things. And I think the only other comic involving Lando, there's the main run of Star Wars comics, which is the second run of Star Wars comics set between Empire Strikes Back and episode 6. That has got Lando in it. And then I believe also in the Age of Rebellion comics, I think there is a Lando one-shot comic in that as well, which I'll be tackling at some point in the future. And I will also say with the Lando Double or Nothing comic, it is a good comic, but I'd say the dialogue itself is, along with the artwork, are probably the best points. The plot is not the strongest. It's alright, the plot. There's not necessarily anything bad about it. It just doesn't jump out like, oh my god, that's amazing, which is quite hard to do and quite rare on miniseries. But it does give more detail to young Lando as a character and to L3-37, and there are just some really fun, cool moments in it too. Now, before I get into the narrative and information about the sort of people involved with the comic and when it was released and stuff, I'm actually going to give you a dump of information. I've already given you quite a bit of information about Lando. As I said, I don't want to fully repeat myself, so if you want to find out slightly more information about Lando, go check out episode 18 of Star Wars Comics in Canon. But the two other bits of information I wanted to kind of share with yourself was information about the Falcon and also L3-37. Now, I actually picked up the Solo Visual Dictionary the other day for about £5, and they're normally about 25 quid. For any American listeners, quid is a slang term for pounds, which is our currency here in the UK. I realise some people may be thinking, what the hell is he talking about? What the hell is quid? Anyway, I managed to get it quite cheap, and while I've been trying to do some of these episodes recently, I've got one for Last Jedi, one for Rise of Skywalker, and the Solo one. I'm aiming to get some of the other ones too, because a lot of them have got a really cool bit of information in them. And I've read through the bits about the Millennium Falcon, and I've also got a whole page open on L3-37, and there's lots of cool things I didn't actually know about. Now, I'm not going to read every single thing on the whole page, so I'm just going to give you some bits and pieces of information from the Solo Visual Dictionary about L3-37, and then I'll give you a little bit more information about the Millennium Falcon. So some of these things I'm going to be reading verbatim, other ones I'm going to kind of paraphrase, but the L3-37 was a self-made droid, cobbled together from both astromech and protocol droid parts. So essentially, when it says self-made, it's not 100% clear on that, but basically it means that there was a droid who potentially got their own consciousness or something, and has basically made their own body out of astromech droids like R2-D2 and protocol droids like C-3PO. Now, so protocol droids in Star Wars are basically the ones that look like humans, kind of walk about, they can translate, that's more or less what they can do, and they can do sort of simple tasks, while astromech droids, they're the ones that normally go in people's spaceships, astromech, and they're also the ones that can, plug into data ports and transfer data, all those sorts of other bits and pieces, whereas obviously protocol droids generally are more like translators and things like that. So L3's brain module began as an R3 astromech brain, so it's the model after R2-D2, and it has been overlaid with a data architecture from an espionage droid, protocol droid processors, and custom state-of-the-art coding. So it's like a mishmash of basically lots of different droids kind of pushed into one. And L3-37 is actually one of a kind as well. So when you can see the picture here, which I will probably take a photo of and put online on Instagram when I post about this, her actual chest looks like the front of R2-D2's chest. So her head is like the top, almost the forehead and the very top of the dome of a astromech droid. Then her chest and sort of lower abdomen-ish area are basically the front parts from an astromech droid. And then her arms look like the legs of an astromech droid, put together. When you see a still picture of her without anything in the background, you can kind of see the whole thing. It's really interesting, actually. I didn't know there was this much about L3-3. And also the thing is with her is that in the end of Solo, she combines with the Millennium Falcon. And it's got a thing here in this visual dictionary that says, L3's ability to directly interface with the Millennium Falcon's state-of-the-art navicomputer allows the ship to reach unparalleled supralight speeds. She's able to calculate complex hyperspace routes that halve the distances usually travelled by slower, more cautious ships. So that, combining with what I'm going to give you some information about the Millennium Falcon in a minute, which is it's basically one of the fastest ships in the whole galaxy. Now, with L3-37's brain put into that, which happens at the end of Solo, it means that the ship itself has the engine capacity to be ridiculously fast, while also having a droid made up of other droids put in there so that they can make much quicker and more efficient calculations when travelling through hyperspace and things. So it all kind of culminates together very interestingly. And one other thing is that due to a side effect of L3's unusual brain design, her brain module produces a self-aware consciousness, which is a lot more deep than most other droids' self-awareness. A lot of droids don't have self-awareness at all. Protocol droids generally I think have slightly more self-awareness due to them having to have a processor and like almost a robotic brain more similar to that of humans, more so than say an astromech droid does. But because of her self-aware consciousness, it's resulted in L3's deep desire to seek independence with all of the other droids, as in she feels like droids are being tortured across the universe and systematically oppressed, which isn't necessarily untrue, but that's why she's so hot on the droid revolution and things. And in this comic it will delve into the droid revolution as well, but obviously in Solo there's one specific that she kind of has a hand in, and that's where she meets her end, whereas there's another one in this comic too, which is a bit of fun. And one last thing to mention, it says that although L3 does have some protocol droid capabilities, such as analysis of organic behaviour, she lacks Tran-Lang processors, basically limiting her abilities as an interpreter. So a little bit more information dump. Now this time I'm going to talk about the Millennium Falcon. So the Falcon is an old YT 1300 freighter, so YT 1300 freighter. It once worked in the galaxy's busiest space lanes. Calrissian saw how powerful its freight-pushing engines were, so he converted the ship into his own speedy sports vessel. Lando modified the two cargo mandibles at the front into an auxiliary ship launch, turning the plain freighter into a unique starship. So freighters, they're just like, it's almost the Earth equivalent of a heavy goods vehicle, you know, something that is pulling something very, very heavy, which is why the engines have to be so strong. So Lando has basically modified the ship to such a degree, it's reduced its capabilities in, say, transporting cargo, but it has increased its capabilities of starship travel and all kinds of other things like that, which is really, really interesting. And one of the notes here as well, it says that it's so different and so unique, there's no other ship like it, and it almost has no parts of it left that are from out of the dock, in air quotes. So basically when it was created and made and released to be sold or whatever, there's barely anything left in there that was from that original model, because so many different parts have either been broken and needed repairing or replacing, as well as all the modifications that have happened to it over the years, not just by Lando, but then also Han did a lot of modifications to it, as well as the numerous people between Han losing it and then Rey getting it in Force Awakens. There are more modifications people have done as well, so people keep modifying this ship, which makes it incredibly unique. And for clarity, many of the modifications that were made to the ship were destroyed in the Kessel Run. But for clarity, the weapons, shields, and speed of the ship are absolutely top-notch. In fact, its hyperdrive is among the fastest in the galaxy and could even outrun an Imperial Star Destroyer, which I think the speed of it itself helps greatly, mixed with the now processor of L3-37. There's also smuggling compartments in there which are sensor-proof. I believe that you see that in Episode 4 A New Hope, when they all basically hide when the ship gets scanned, which is a really cool little feature too. Now, I've also taken another picture, which is a really, really cool diagram in the middle of this book, which shows the Millennium Falcon with part of its top kind of taken off, so you can see the inner workings of it in a lot of ways. It's a really, really cool image, and I just want to share that. So as I say, if you go on, I think Facebook, or really Instagram's the best place to catch a lot of my posts. I'll be posting this episode up on Saturdays as per usual. I'm going to aim to post the photos also on Saturday, but sometimes I get sidetracked or busy, and therefore, if that happens, I'll be uploading them on Sunday. So on Saturday or Sunday, check out at Genuine Chit-Chat on Instagram, and you'll be able to see some of the photos of things. Not only you get to see the covers of the Lando issues, and I've taken a photo of two of the panels in the Lando comics that are really cool, but also I've taken a photo of the L3-37 just standing there, as well as this part of the Millennium Falcon, just so you get a bit more information and things. And the last thing I'm going to say about the Millennium Falcon, and this is quoting from the book itself, The Millennium Falcon has an outwardly sophisticated style that conceals the fiery core of a spirited fighter, not unlike its owner, Lando Calrissian. By covering the Falcon in mostly utilitarian cargo-loading features, Calrissian presents a sleek ship with a very deceptive lift-to-mass ratio, perfect for smuggling runs. So yeah, everyone always sees it and says it's a hunk of junk, yet its internal workings are amazing. I kind of think of it almost as like, if you get a really old car from like, let's say the 60s or something, or even the 50s, that looks quite cool, but a lot of people nowadays wouldn't like the look of it. And basically, over the years, you just keep replacing things to make them better and better. So you can get cars now which have like the chassis, the outer part of the vehicle looking the same as like, a 50s or 60s vehicle, but they've updated and upgraded the engines, the suspension, the brakes, the steering, everything like that, to that of a brand new brilliant vehicle. So it looks old school and cool, but it runs like a new vehicle. That is generally how I've interpreted this information about the Millennium Falcon. So yeah, that's just the information I wanted to give. As I said, I didn't want this just to me constantly give you tons of information about the Falcon and L3-37, but I thought this was a really interesting time to kind of bring it up because when else? So with all of that in mind, let's go on to the mini-series itself. So Lando Double or Nothing is 5 issues long. Issue number 1 was released in May 2018, and the 5th and final issue was released in September 2018, and the full trade paperback collection was released in November 2018. And for clarity, the Solo movie itself came out in May 2018 as well, so this Double or Nothing comic started like within a week or so of the Solo film coming out, and then it finished basically around the time I think Solo came to home release. The writer for this is Rodney Barnes, the artist is Paolo Villanelli, and the colourist is Andres Mossa. And I did just want to add again on this, the artwork of this is amazing, and the dialogue itself between Lando and L3-37 is top-notch. There are genuinely some parts in this that I was actually giggling to myself, which is an incredibly rare thing to happen to me, especially when reading comics. I don't generally laugh that much, but there are some really cool bits that I'm going to read a couple of them, but I'm not going to read them all because, as I always say on the show, I want to try and make sure that you guys have enough information so if you don't pick up the comic, you kind of vaguely know what's going on, but if you do pick up the comic, you still get a really good read with loads of cool parts in it. So, with that in mind, here's the opening crawl. The Galactic Empire grips the various star systems in a stranglehold of repression, but there is still hope for the criminals who seek to profit under the new regime. Lando Calrissian, the, in air quotes, greatest smuggler in the galaxy, end quote, and captain of the Millennium Falcon, lives for the big score, especially if it's at the roll of a dice, and nothing will ever get between Lando and his fortune and glory. So with all that in mind, the first comic starts with Lando doing his Calrissian Chronicles, which you see him do a little bit in the Solo, a Star Wars story. In every one of these comics there are monologue/narration by Lando in his very well-known way, and it is brilliant. I'm barely going to read any of them because it does take away from the comic when you go to read them, but this is a really cool comic. If your favourite part of Solo was Lando and L3, then this is the comic for you. So Lando's there contemplating turning the Falcon into some sort of casino for some reason, and L3-37 kind of giving him shtick for it. And then it goes to this planet. Now, Calrissian is new basically in this comic. It's not really shown anywhere else. And then there is a species called Protrusians who are involved, and they're only in a certain point of view Empire Strikes Back. They're not elsewhere. So both of these are quite new. Protrusians are basically pink-skinned humanoid beings, so actually pinky purple coloured skin. So there's a Protrusian female named Christis, and she essentially needs weapons to be smuggled onto her planet to save her dad and people from the Empire who have recently been forced into slavery. And while this is happening, you've got Lando on a planet called Batov buying a new cape. Christis basically approaches him, asks him for some help, and is interrupted by a guy who Lando cheated previously in a Sabacc game, and Lando and Christis do manage to sort of escape, but they part ways, and Christis says, well, let me know in the morning what you think if you want to help my people smuggle these weapons in things, or if you're not interested. And she gives him a little kiss, and then leaves. And back on the Falcon, I'm just going to read a little exchange between Lando and L3. Once again, I'm going to read a couple of these throughout the comic, but I'm not going to read too many because they are probably the best parts of the whole comic, so I just want to give you guys a sort of taster. So it starts with Lando. Once she gives me the credits, we could just go. No way she'd find us. And now this is L3, and I'm going to be swapping between the two. Please refrain from the use of we and us in regards to morally deplorable reasoning. Were it me considering the mission, it's not. Did someone say something? No? I'll proceed. The Empire has brought suffering to the universe in the name of civilization. Those in it, such as myself, machines programmed with empathy, rest at the bottom of the concern. As such, we droids toil through a meaningless existence while conscious of said meaninglessness. If given the opportunity to aid in the freeing of my or any race, I'd gladly do so. For free? Were I a battle droid rather than a navigator, this conversation would be abrupt. Look, I'm a legend. Kinda. That wet bar, those couches, and most importantly, my portrait deserve to exist, and proper adoration takes credits. And if you don't pay back Brushan, even if you get all of those things, you'll really be a legend because you'll be dead. No, kinda. Good point. Score 1 for the smartest lady in the room. And that's where the exchange sort of ends, and then it cuts to Lando speaking with Christis later. Lando agrees to take Christis along with him, but when she asks to take her men with them, he says no. They then have a few conversations a bit back and forth, and one of the queries is that Lando asks how Christis has so much money if she apparently comes from a slave world and things. Christis said that the credits are a combination of savings that her father had before everything basically went bad, and also doing a few other bits and pieces here. And then what she's going to do is, hopefully, once the people get freed, they're going to try and start new lives for the whole colony, and using some of that money. She says that it was her hope that once Lando knew of the intentions, that he wouldn't desire payment. And Lando says, "You hoped wrong, lady. My hide's on the line. The fee remains the same." And Christis walks into a different department saying, "I'm truly sorry to hear that." And L3 says, "Tough to convey how good it feels to have someone share my pain." Some alarms and things go off, and so basically they get interrupted by some TIE fighters. It's then got sort of several panels and pages of the space battle things. I've taken one photo of one of them because the artwork, as I said before, is brilliant in this issue, and there's a really, really nice double-page spread of a cool thing. So I took a photo of that, and essentially they managed to defeat the TIE fighters and blow them up. And then this comic ends with Lando saying, "I'm aware that you all may feel a little funny about the praise that you want to heap on me, but don't fight the feeling." And L3 says, "As much as I'd love to shower you with praise, oh wonderful warrior of the skies, I think we have something bigger we should focus on." What's that? We're approaching Calrissian. Can't a guy ever get a minute to celebrate himself? And that's where number 1 comic ends. So comic number 2 starts with the Falcon approaching Calrissian, noticing lots of Imperials kind of nearby and things, so they switch off all the power of the ship, so it just drifts towards Calrissian. As it drifts in there, it gets pulled into the gravitational pull of the planet, and then goes into the atmosphere. It goes in quite heavily, and then they manage to activate the power just before it hits the ground and survive and save the Falcon, and they decide to land it in a junkyard, kind of quite far out on the outskirts, away from main civilizations. The trio split up. L3 decides to go in sort of the droid scrappage yard area to kind of try and find some information that way, and Christis and Lando go separately. Christis then gets captured, and Lando starts getting shot at by some locals. And this is a bit I want to read as well because it's just quite a funny story. So just to clarify, Lando is now, the cape he is wearing is quite a thick cape, seeming like it's from a hide of some sort of beast. So while he's shooting and having a gunfight with all of these locals, that he very easily manages to dodge out the way of many bullets and shoot a lot of them, because Lando is actually surprisingly handy, not only in fist fighting and weapon fighting, but also as a sort of gunslinger in a lot of ways. He tries to avoid it and has this sort of, the facade that he's just a lover and he never fights or anything like that. But in the previous Lando comic I tackled in episode 18, he actually explains his reasoning for doing that, and is the fact that anyone who finds out he's not actually the kind of smooth-talking lover sort of character he wants people to think he is, they normally get killed. So his kind of legacy, his reputation of being someone not to take too seriously, is continued, so that when there gets a dire situation, he can really pull out all the stops and surprise people, which is a really interesting thing for his character. But yeah, I just want to read this part because this bit did make me giggle. "If one of you singed my cape, your suffering will be legendary. I'll tell you why. It was from a being by the name of Naru. He had a splendid voice, could sing like the sweetest of celestials. Oh, but his card playing lacked the same aptitude. He didn't take to defeat so well, so much so he said, 'Calrissian, you'll be wearing my hide before you make it out of here alive.' Well, let's just say, I'll truly miss his singing." And he says that as all of the goons around him are gone, and then there's a lot more ships coming his way that don't appear to be Imperial ships. They seem to be potentially the local ships who are like thugs and things. And as he looks up and sees the ships, he says, if they keep coming, I'll eventually run out of stories to tell." As the ships approach, they're shooting Lando quite a lot, and he's like running and hiding. His cape gets caught and he throws it, and it gets basically singed and damaged. As he dives down this slope, he says, "These are ruffians. They don't care that I'm cold, wet, or a legend." And as he does that, he manages to find a seemingly crashed ship that's flyable, gets in there, and flies off. And as that's happening, he manages to shoot 1 or 2 crafts, but then he is just overwhelmed by the sheer volume of crafts going after him, and his ship explodes. It cuts to Christis, who is in an imperial jail. She tries to call Lando via comms, can't get through, so she contacts L3. L3 is in this line, basically watching droids go up to this furnace. They get shot by stormtroopers, and then their carcasses just thrown in the furnace. After she sees all this, she kind of freaks out a bit and says she needs to put a stop to it, and then runs away, and there's a couple of stormtroopers shooting after her. Then, as Christis is seen talking to someone via comms and things, a stormtrooper opens up the cell. Then it shows towards the end of the comic that the locals who captured Lando take him to their leader. He's been knocked out, clearly. The explosion bit was a bit jarring in a sense of, obviously he didn't die in the explosion. The question is kind of how. But he's been scathed a bit and he seems a bit hurt, but he's not like properly mortally wounded. But he gets taken, he gets chained up, and then his leader comes up to him riding an AT-ST. Now, a little information here about AT-STs. Now, AT-STs were first shown in Empire Strikes Back, and it means all-terrain scout vehicle. They're called chicken walkers as well, or just walkers. It's basically a box with two legs that shoots a lot. They're most prominent in Episode 6 and the Battle of Endor, and then just for clarity as well, in Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, on Kashyyyk, which is the planet of the Wookiees, where Yoda is, along with Chewie and Tarful, there's actually a very similar transport, and it's an AT-RT, which is what the clones are riding. And the only difference to that is it's an all-terrain recon transport. So the one you see in Revenge of the Sith is a kind of a precursor to the AT-ST. And then also in Star Wars Rebels, the animated show, which is set before A New Hope and things, there is something called the AT-DP, which kind of has a rounded sort of domey things on the side. They almost look like strange bulbous eyes. And as I said, those are called AT-DPs, which are all-terrain defense pods. So there you go, there's a couple little variation on AT-STs. For clarity, the AT-ST as well, that this thug is riding, it's had its like head kind of ripped off in a sense, so it's basically just the legs and the controls and seemingly the gun. So not a full armoured one, but it is still pretty impressive and quite scary to have coming towards you. So the third comic starts with Lando talking to this thug boss who is called Batala, and Batala is quite short, so this kind of has little man syndrome, which Lando makes a comment about, and you can actually see that while Batala is commanding Lando, he is standing on the back of one of his air quotes subjects. So there's the people who basically, I don't know, worship him or fear him or whatever, someone is on their all fours and he's standing just on their back, just so he seems taller and more intimidating. They have a back and forth and things, and then they eventually decide to move Lando. While that's happening, it shows L3 shuts off the droid furnace, and Christis is reunited with her dad. She gets taken out of the Imperial cell and gets thrown back into the slavery area that she was from originally. Christis tells her dad, who's called Rythus, that Lando is going to help them. And then back to Lando, he's in this cell, he basically fakes having some sort of stomach pain or something. A protocol droid kind of goes near the sort of bars that hold him in his cell and open it just to kind of check on him, and then he lunges at the protocol droid, rips out its comlink from its neck, and then escapes. He tells L3 to get to the Falcon to provide some sort of backup and things, and they have a back and forth about how Lando shouldn't have ripped that thing out of that poor protocol droid's neck because they're not just tools and things, which is quite a common theme with L3 whenever she speaks about anything like that. And then as that's all going on, Lando is recaptured. When he's recaptured, he's told that he's basically not going to get killed on the basis that they have plans for him. He goes back to Christis and her dad, Rythus, in this kind of slavery area, and they're both speaking to the rest of their people, the Petrusian people, and none of them really want to fight. They feel too beaten down by the Empire, and they all say they'd rather live in slavery than die for a cause. Back to Lando, he's in this arena that he's been thrown in by these sort of thugs and things, and he makes some sort of comment, you can make me fight against some sort of big giant brute, and then, I'm going to have to use my agility and wits to beat them, and they were like, kind of, and instead 4 brutes come out. Well, one's a human, and 3 of them are just quite large beings, but apparently they're people that Lando has swindled in the past. They all have weapons and go at him, and Lando just has some sort of sword blade thing. In a fairly spectacular way, Lando does manage to beat / potentially defeat or maybe even kill 2 of them fairly quickly while sort of dancing around and escaping the attacks from the other ones, and then the Falcon arrives. They do manage to escape and fly the Falcon away. There's this big beast thing that seems to kind of try and attack them, and then it doesn't, and then it never shows up again. But yeah, as they start to escape, some TIE fighters appear. They do manage to speak to Christis and just say, are you basically ready? Because we're coming back to basically sort out and go with the deal that we agreed on. And Christis says, yeah, kind of. And then, as I said, the TIE fighters attack, and that's where the comic ends. Comic number 4 starts with the Millennium Falcon outmaneuvering some TIE fighters, and After doing all that sort of stuff, L3 lands the ship nearest where they were before, and Lando has to enter the sewers. He makes some sort of comment about not wearing a cape or something, but then he does go into the sewers wearing a cape anyway, and he gets attacked by these sort of ice crystal spiders that when they get destroyed, they seem to reassemble themselves. They're quite cool, and they come up one more time in this comic, but they don't seem to come up anywhere else, and they don't look anything like the spiders in Mandalorian or in Rebels, the ones in Rebels called the Krykna. So they don't look anything like this, they're just cool ice spider things. Lando gets nearer and nearer to where the Perusian people are being held, and he asks L3 to disable the security monitors and the cameras and things, and then Lando finds Christis and her dad, Rythus. They basically tell him that their own people don't actually want to rebel, and Lando's like, why do we do all this then if your people don't want to rebel? So they ask him to try and motivate their people. Lando does this inspiring speech, and he manages to rally all of them, and so what they decide is 1/3 of the prisoners go with Lando back to the ship to get the weapons, while the other 2/3 stay where they are. The timing is very important on this because there's a changeover between the stormtroopers who are basically patrolling and keeping watch and things. There's a changeover of the staff, and at that point is when there's the lowest amount of stormtroopers on the area. So all the people, they go through the sewer area that Lando went through again, they fight the spiders again, then everyone gets into position for the revolution to begin, and that is where the 4th comic ends. Now, I sound like I skipped through a lot in the 4th comic. A lot of it is visual stuff that looks quite cool, but as you know, I try not to really explain everything visually, and as I said, if you want to know more details, read the comic. So the 5th and final comic, it starts amidst a battle, and Lando is noting to himself that the Perusians seem like they're actually losing, which isn't a great thing. As he says this to Christis and Rythus, they say that there's actually a part 2 of their plan. Lando asks why he wasn't involved. They say, you're a rogue, what does it matter? Anyway, we've got a part 2, here we go. And what they've managed to do is, a lot of the slavery and things that they were doing as slaves were meant to be dismantling droids that were around there and chucking them in the junk pile. What they were actually doing is fixing a lot of them and getting them ready to reactivation. And then when they activate part 2 of their plan, that is them reactivating a lot of these droids that have been damaged. And a lot of the droids, there's battle droids, as in the really skinny ones that are most prominent in episode 1 and 2. You get the super battle droids, which are the big, thicker ones, which are in episodes 2 and 3. You get protocol droids, you get other types of droids. There's lots of different droids they managed to repair, and it's just quite cool seeing this sort of droid uprising. TIE fighters come and try and provide some air support, so L3 flies the Falcon, destroys the TIEs pretty quickly, and then she lands the ship and wants to join the battle with all those battle droids, saying, "The Empire has brought its best, now it's time they taste ours." And all the battle droids start facing off against the stormtroopers. I've taken another photo of that because L3 holding up a rifle while standing on a cliff edge while a lot of the droids are fighting, it's a really cool thing to see, especially as, you know, L3 is quite a cool character, so if you fancy that, once again, go to Instagram. Then back in the midst of the battle, Christis gets hurt, so Lando manages to sort of save her, and while that's all going on, things are noticeably getting pretty mad. And then Lando helps Christis and her dad sort of escape, and Lando and L3 are then reunited, and they hold back a lot of the stormtroopers while the rest of the Perusians escape. Lando and L3 go back to try and get the Falcon, and it is absolutely surrounded by stormtroopers, and L3 says, look, there's no way we're getting the Falcon back here. If you try, it's a suicide mission. So they decide to go back and find the escapees, and they can still hear blaster fire and things going on in the background. They ask if that is everyone, and the Perusians say, yeah, everyone is here. The rest of the battle you can hear is still just all those droids that are fighting for us. So they've managed to obtain this imperial shuttle that managed to fit all the Perusians on there. Lando and L3 managed to hitch a ride, and when they're on this imperial shuttle, they managed to hear some imperial chatter over the comms and things, and they hear that the stormtroopers are moving the Millennium Falcon into lockup. So the Perusians give Lando some credits and drop him off onto the planet Vandor, which is where the Millennium Falcon is basically locked up in storage. And Lando gets the credits from the Perusians, as I said, and he decides to play some sabacc while he tries to figure out how to get his ship free. And that is the place that you see him playing when Han Solo shows up. And the comic ends just before Han Solo shows up. So that is one of the many reasons why the Millennium Falcon is locked up, is because the Imperials took it when Lando was partly involved in some sort of revolution. And as I said, that is where the comic ends. As I said, guys, this one, comic-wise, it is a good comic. It's not top tier, but the dialogue is brilliant. The artwork is really, really good. And a lot of, it's a really, really good companion comic to go along with Solo: A Star Wars Story. One of the things I'd say to people is if you're going to watch Solo Star Wars Story anytime soon and you want some comics to get, I do actually recommend the Han Solo Imperial Cadet comic, which I tackled a little while ago on this, which basically shows his few years spanning in the Imperial Academy, and it introduces a character called Valance, who is going to come up later in a mini-series I'm tackling called Target Vader, then also appears in the Empire Ascendant one-off, which is the finale of the Dr. Aphra comics and the Star Wars comics, ending just before the Battle of Hoth, which is where Empire Strikes Back starts. And then there's a new series going on, which is called Bounty Hunters, which stars Valance. So Valance will be coming up again, and when I speak about him in the future and tackle the content that he is in, I will reference the Imperial Cadet comic and things. But the Imperial Cadet comic, as well as the Lando Double or Nothing comic, go really, really well as companion comics to the Solo Star Wars Story, so I really recommend you guys read those too. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I'm sorry at the start that I was giving just loads of information about the Millennium Falcon and L3-37. I hope you guys found that enjoyable and interesting. I'm trying to get more and more of these visual dictionaries, but they are quite expensive and you need to make sure I get the ones that are correct after the new canon, because you don't want to get some ones from like the prequels that are no longer in date for their canonology, I don't know. Obviously, with Legends happening and things, it does kind of complicate matters, but obviously all the films are released after the canonization. It's pretty simple going. But I'm going to try and get more of these visual dictionaries because they've just got some really, really cool information in there. And when I eventually tackle more Rise of Skywalker or Last Jedi-centric comics, I will potentially target those, although I feel like I tackled all of those comics in the past, except when I tackle the Age of Resistance comics, which will be at some point in the future. Coming up over the following weeks, next week is actually a super special episode, which I'm actually speaking with an author of some Star Wars content. I don't want to give any more information to that because I don't want to, just in case anything happens and we don't end up chatting, I don't want to kind of spoil it in a sense, but I'm very, very excited for it. And I'm going to have them on. It will probably be about an hour-long chat, and I'll be releasing it both on this show and on Genuine Chit-Chat at the same time, so that's what you can expect next week, and it is going to be tackling some of the things I have tackled on this and stuff that I'll be tackling in the future, so I'm very, very excited about that. And so that'll be next week. The week after that, I have not 100% decided what I'm going to be doing, because I'm pretty tempted to, I can either finish the Age of Republic, Padme Anakin, and the two other stories in the special, and that will finish the whole Age of Republic one-shot series, or I might tackle the Thrawn comics. The Thrawn comics are a 6-part comic series, which is actually an adaptation of the Thrawn novel by Timothy Zahn. That's in the new canonized Thrawn novels, because there were 3 Thrawn novels which were in Legends, which are the Heir to the Empire trilogy, which were kind of considered as the next sequel films before the new canon happened. And then when Thrawn appeared in Star Wars Rebels, Timothy Zahn had written a trilogy of which is Thrawn Alliances, and Thrawn Treason, which is all about his kind of rise in the Empire and whatnot. And then there's a new trilogy, which is the Ascendancy trilogy. The first one out is called Chaos Rising. The second one I think is Greater Good, and the third one hasn't been named yet, and the second one isn't out yet. But the 2 Thrawn trilogies, which I'll go into more at some other point, it is basically one Thrawn trilogy, which is the one that's all out at the moment, is set as his time before Star Wars Rebels and him rising in the ranks of the Empire. The Ascendancy trilogy is him before that, and it's all about the Chiss who live in the unknown regions and all these sorts of other things as well. So I mentioned about Thrawn because his name was recently brought up in The Mandalorian, so I'm quite tempted to do an episode all about Thrawn and what we kind of know in the canon, just so if he pops up later in Mandalorian, which I doubt, in this season at least, I highly doubt, maybe next season, if he does pop up again, people have got some of that context and things about Thrawn. So pretty tempted to do Thrawn. I've kind of talked myself into it in this part, so I may end up doing, as I said, next week is the one with the Star Wars author, the week after that will probably be Thrawn, and then the week after that I'll probably finish off the Age of Republic Heroes comics, and that'll be all that done, and then that'll be me having a little break for the rest of the year until I come back in 2021 with more stuff. But guys, let me know if you want me to tackle Thrawn, if you don't want me to tackle Thrawn, or if you have any specific comics you want me to tackle sooner rather than later. And yeah, make sure you check out my other show, Genuine Chit-Chat. You can find me on all social media places at Genuine Chit-Chat on Facebook, Instagram, and on Twitter. And on those places I do post pictures of the comics that I've spoken about, as well as the posts for both Genuine Chit-Chat and Star Wars Comics in Canon. as well as a lot of the other times when I do guest spots on other people's shows, either shows that are on this very network of Comics in Motion. You know, I've done an Indie Comic Spotlight recently where myself and Tony spoke with the creator Mark Russell about his comic Billionaire Island, as well as his predecessor The Second Coming and things. That was an incredible chat. I've also recently recorded an episode of Comics on Trial where myself and Tony go head to head. I am prosecuting Rise of Skywalker, Tony is defending it, and my glorious occasional self-proclaimed co-host of Genuine Chit-Chat and my girlfriend who I live with, Megan, she is the judge of that one, which is quite an interesting one. I'm excited for that to release. And then I was also on the Scott Pilgrim TV and movie reviews, also with Tony again, but also with Dave Horrocks. And then I'm also doing lots of other collaborations and things as well. I've included a lot of them in the show notes here. So if you make sure you just check out the episode information in whatever podcast app that you are listening to this in, it should have lists of where you can find my other collaborations, guest spots, and all sorts of other things too. But yeah, follow me on social media, you just get updated with all that stuff anyway, or you can email me at starwarscomicsincanon@outlook.com. Any questions you have, any thought of other information, things like that, let me know. If you've got any pointers, if you want me to do anything specifically, or blah blah blah. And yeah, that is relatively it from me, guys, at the moment. So as always, guys, thank you so much for listening. Can't wait to release the episode I'll be releasing next week. I'm very excited about that, so make sure you subscribe to the Comics in Motion feed. Check out all the other great shows on Comics in Motion. I'm currently doing a backlog of all the Superheroes for Dummies episodes, so I'm listening to all of them because they're just great, and obviously listening to Indie Comic Spotlight quite a lot, which is always a lot of fun. And yeah, as always, guys, may the Force be with you.